You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to ReThreading Madness.
When I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do, when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and now I'm going to do something unusual. Instead of interviewing someone else, today I will be stepping out from behind the mic. For many of us, silence was not a choice we made, but the circumstances we find ourselves in without a verbal way out. And while it is never an easy moment, there comes a time when silence about some things simply becomes impossible to maintain. This is one of those moments for me. Before going any further, I want to be clear that what follows is my personal experience and my interpretation of events. All of it is shared individually from my perspective and is not intended to suggest wrongdoing by any individual. And I want to offer a trigger warning. I will be talking about childhood sexual trauma. While I won't be going into any details, please do what you need to be safe in this time. My focus here is to talk about the systems, the culture, and the conditions that made it possible to harm me as a child, and how I recently found out that some children in southern rural Alberta, where I grew up, still live with those same conditions. The most shocking part of this story, though, is that it has been 50 years since I ran away from that abuse. In that time, the rest of the world took steps to protect women and children. We secured human rights and protections that enabled those of us who needed them to find freedom. These were sweeping changes, bringing a sense of safety into women's lives that we historically hadn't had before. Our current state is not perfect, no system is, but there are demonstrable, measurable gains that have happened in the last half-century. Given what is happening in the world now, where women's rights are again being threatened, my little story takes on a deeper meaning well beyond my life. My story is what happens when those rights are diminished, and why it is so very important to keep fighting. 6 generations ago, in 1857, my great-great-great maternal grandfather, Otis Skinner Cole, and his wife Lucy and 6 boys immigrated from England and landed on the eastern shore of the United States at what was then called Garden City. Within a year and a half, he buried Lucy and a newborn son, and then watched the remaining 6 children be quickly sent away, one by one. One of those boys, called Opie, had just turned 11 and became an indentured servant to a carpenter who offered room and board for long hours of labor. Opie grew up carrying a kind of trauma for which no one at the time had language. When he and his wife and 3 children eventually traveled across the country and then up into the Canadian prairies, he brought that nonverbal trauma with him, and he passed it down to his children, who passed it down to theirs, and then to grandchildren, and so on, until it landed in my life. This is how intergenerational trauma moves, not in documented genealogical family trees, but fueled by the things we cannot name and the unspoken lessons shaped by how we relate to each other. I grew up on a farm north of a small village called Delia in southern Alberta. If you did not grow up in rural Canada, you might not realize what that means. Life there is shaped by the pioneer mythology, the idea that country life is safe, the belief that hardship is noble, suffering is private, and a good farm family keeps its struggles behind closed doors. Protecting the legacy of a farm and the family's reputation, and most especially the father's, mattered more than protecting children who were measured first as farm labor. This was true in my family. My father did not see children as having the capacity to feel. He said this to me directly. This translated into seeing us as not quite human. One could say it was a necessary perspective to being able to harm a child, his child, me. Back then, women had few rights. My mother couldn't open a bank account without my father's signature. She couldn't work without his permission. Mail for her arrived dressed in his name with a Mrs. tacked on. A woman's value came from marriage, from service, from holding a family together, no matter the cost to herself or others. A farmer's wife was held up as respectable when she also drove the tractor to work the fields, cleaned the pig stalls, and built chicken coops, after keeping a house, birthing babies, medically tending to the animals, and baking cakes. This is what you will read in the obituaries for a good farmer's wife. In the mid-70s, when I grew up, rural teenage girls were expected to ready themselves through desirability to secure a husband, but then also blamed for anything that happened to them because of that desirability. It was a perfect trap. This was reinforced every day. I grew up watching teenage boys as they exercised their socially sanctioned right to a girl's body. If a girl accepted booze, his right to access was assumed. If he took her on a date, he was entitled. If she objected, no really just meant yes. And if she complained, it was not for lack of consent, but her own regret the morning after. Her skirt was too short, her shirt was too low, and unless a girl was dead, whatever happened to her was considered her own doing. And once it was known in a small community that a girl had been, quote, got, she was fair game, and other boys came out of the woodwork, and regardless of the circumstances, it would always be her fault. She was labeled, as my mother would say, a girl of ill repute. And how could a boy be held responsible for that? Of course, not every girl experienced this. Some watched from the edges, grateful to be spared, but knowing how easily that line could shift. Back then, growing up female in rural Alberta was like walking through a minefield, knowing harm could come without warning, with no protection, no control, and no sense of any world beyond the one that currently confined you. Now, to get the full picture of life on a farm in southern Alberta, it is essential to add to all that I just mentioned the isolation that exists. To do that, it needs to be described. Unlike in the country, when you live in the city, you often share a wall, or a very narrow walkway or sidewalk with your neighbors. Police are visible, and if you need them, you just call. They will come within 5 to 15 minutes. Mandated reporters are less likely to be square dancing with your parents at the hall over the weekend. There are lights on every night, all night long, and so, if you have to run, you can see where you are going. And if you scream for help, you have a greater chance of someone hearing you and not being bound by politics, which would prevent them from coming to your aid. However, in the country, you could scream all you want. No neighbor will hear you because they are likely 1 to 2 miles away at any given moment. And if by chance they do, first they will calculate the social cost to them of helping a child or spouse of a parent or partner, particularly if the latter are male. The police never drive by your home, and if you call them, it will take about an hour or more for them to arrive. Not only that, everyone will know they came to your place, and it will likely be printed in the local newspaper within a month. There are miles and miles of gravel roads between you and help, and children have no access to transportation outside of their parents. When I was a kid, our phone was on a party line and attached to the wall in the kitchen. Every call was long distance and cost money, which my parents forbade. There was little to no privacy. Teachers know your parents personally and share the same cultural expectations. My school had no counselors. Social workers were unheard of. Growing up, I'm not even sure I knew what they did. There were no educational materials on sex, abuse, sexual assault, birth control, or violence anywhere, not in the home, not in the school, and while I might have been exposed to some of it on the TV, our 2 channels offered little actual information. When I was a kid, living on the farm, and your parents were not safe, there was no one to call for help. And even if a place or someone did exist, it was not something I, as a child, had ever been made aware of. So absolutely inaccessible for me. At 6 years old, I had already begun counting down the years until I could legally leave home, and planning my escape if an opportunity presented itself. I built suitcases out of cardboard boxes, complete with hinges and handles, and practiced how to pack them quickly. I walked barefoot on the sharp red shale gravel of our farmyard to toughen my feet so I could run if I had to. Run without shoes over God knows what in the pitch black darkness of every night because there are no streetlights in the country. I am telling you this so that you understand the level of desperation a small child must have felt to prepare for survival in that way, and just how isolated as a child I was. In this world, I was sexually harmed, and beyond the ways boys presumed a right, I was also harmed by my father. And then at 14, I was harmed by my brother-in-law, and again more violently by him at 15. And I knew no one would be coming to save me. The abuse I was living in was unbearable and unlivable. My opportunity to run away came at 16, and I took it because the alternative was many, many more years of harm. My running was not rebellion. It wasn't drama. It wasn't because I was crazy. It was survival. Running in 1975 was nearly impossible for a teenager. I was too young to get a job, too young to rent a place, too young for welfare, And even if I had reached out to services and tried, they were obligated to report me to the police and have me taken back home. The only reason I wasn't returned to that danger was because a First Nations family on the Sutana Reserve took me in and kept me hidden. I credit them and the young man I was with, Jackie Crowchild, for saving my life, my white life, something Indigenous people have been doing for settlers long before my family arrived on Turtle Island. Years later, I learned how my family explained my disappearance to our small community. They described me as wild, unstable, and as one of those shameless, out-of-control girls. Explanations that made themselves look like the victims of my leaving rather than the cause of it. That is the well-known choreography of families built on silence and suffering under the weight of intergenerational harm. The truth teller, the one who exposes the wound, is the one punished for naming it. For many years after leaving, I did try to maintain some kind of relationship with my family. Back then, the idea of, quote, no contact wasn't a thing. Nobody I knew had done it. But when I finally confronted them about the harm I had endured, their reaction made it unmistakably clear. My safety and the safety of my young daughters meant I had to let them go completely. And so I did. And I had no contact with them for almost 40 years. During those decades, I built a life over 1,000 kilometers away in Vancouver, BC. Vancouver was and is a diverse city that thrived on difference and tolerance, ensuring progress. I witnessed and helped push social change. Women created safe spaces for those being beat so that they could escape. They forced the world to name sexual harm for what it was, and lobbied for education and changes to laws around sexual assault to stop the re-traumatization of those who bravely came forward. They pushed for charges and then convictions, including for teachers and daycare workers and others who appeared above question. It was women who created space so that abuse in churches by clergy was exposed, and who pushed for authorities to take on human trafficking rings once thought absent here in Canada. Women around the globe used Me Too to bring down employers and others who abused their power to coerce consent. And now there is an entire army of them using #TherapyToo, set on ensuring that mental health professionals who abuse their power and assault their clients are removed from their posts as well. Decade after decade, I've watched as women gained rights denied to my mother and to myself. I evolved into a mental health and disability rights activist, an author, and a radio host, and I believed quite genuinely that even in the most rural parts of Alberta, these movements were active. And then my father died.
Eoch Tanuyap, Kuiget Yuans Kuinsna. Hi everybody, my name is Kuiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today we have a bit of an unusual program for you here. I have been sharing my lived experience growing up in rural southern Alberta and how those early patterns resurfaced decades later. In 2024, my father died and named me in his will. Not because he was thinking of me, leaving me out would have been more respectful. It would have complied with my clear request of no contact. By including me, he performed his final act of punishment for telling on him. In estate circles, this happens so often, they have a name for it: retaliatory inheritance. And with that, I was forced back into dealing with that small community and my family. Finding myself back inside that rural dynamic felt like stepping into a time capsule. The culture hadn't evolved. The old patterns were waiting intact, as though frozen in place. One of the personal representatives of the estate, meaning executor, was my big sister, the same one whose husband I had disclosed had harmed me as a teenager, the same one who I couldn't turn to for protection, and whom I had confronted way back when. And the interactions around the estate felt like the same choreography. What unfolded felt like erasure. I was present but unnamed, speaking but not heard. My questions were brushed aside. My estrangement weaponized against me as a reason to disregard. Estate lawyers who had never met me treated me in a way that felt like my legal rights were optional, as if my access to justice depended on whether my siblings, meaning my big sister, allowed it. I was forced to turn to the courts. I went there believing in the justice system. In those hallowed courtrooms, I trusted that truth mattered, that facts were tested, that evidence guided decisions. I believed judges were neutral, careful, and bound by procedures meant to protect what was true. But what I encountered in that rural courtroom did not resemble justice as I understood it, and worse, it was familiar. It echoed patterns I had seen before in rural southern Alberta, used on us girls in the 70s. Back then, it showed up as, she wanted it, you can't trust her, and she's a slut. In court, my documented sexual trauma was reduced to, quote, allegation, and the reality of what I had survived felt questioned in that familiar way survivors know, where credibility and stability get quietly entangled, and my medically certified disabilities were likewise described as, quote, alleged. What I experienced was a reenactment, a legal echo, so to speak, of the same dismissal and disbelief I had survived from my family. The person acting on behalf of the estate and my siblings was a lawyer who publicly branded herself as a feminist, someone who had sat on the executive of LEAF, an organization devoted to women's equality. Yet the arguments presented in court reminded me of patterns I had only ever seen in patriarchal systems that don't want women to speak. Substantiated disclosures of trauma reframed as unreliable, disability tooled into a complication, and narratives that, to me, had the effect of casting the survivor as, quote, crazy and, quote, the problem, rather than the person harmed. As an intersectional feminist, this was disorienting and destabilizing and deeply, deeply painful. It was like I had been transported back to a time before I ran. The courtroom felt frozen in an era I thought we had all long since outgrown. It was as if progress, the progress I had lived and helped build for decades, had simply not happened, at least not here, as though the justice system in that pocket of rural southern Alberta still operated according to the cultural norms I fled at 16. After court, it was as if it was expected that I would go away, as I had at 16, and again when I went no contact as an adult. And for a couple weeks, I nearly did. I was in shock. People asked, but I was unable to explain what had happened, unable to understand why the system I had so much respect for had collapsed so quickly around me. But then the court transcript arrived. Clarity came with it, and as the confusion lifted, an instinct born from decades of advocacy rose up in me to pursue truth and accountability. And I did what I have learned over all these decades to do. I began fighting back. I filed a complaint with LEAF, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, whose membership is comprised of feminist lawyers, and they responded with a compassionate acknowledgement of the harm I described. I filed with the Law Society of Alberta. I filed with the Canadian Judicial Council. I filed these complaints because I believed what happened in that courtroom required oversight. I did it because the justice system depends on equality and truth, no matter where you live in Canada, neither of which I felt that day, and because what I witnessed was bigger than me or my case. I did it because what I saw reflected was a systemic failure, one that puts rural women and children, like I was, at risk. I also contacted the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services. Their co-CEO wrote something to me that has stayed with me ever since. She said, quote, "Unfortunately, change in this system is slow, and a lack of trauma-informed practice is not unique to what happened to you in Drumheller. It is very widespread." End of quote. Widespread. Think about that. 50 years, half a century after I ran from harm as a young teenager in rural southern Alberta, it is still this widespread. Statistics now show that in some rural parts of our country, sexual and domestic violence rates are at times double those in the cities. At the same time, services are limited and miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, away. Half a century of advancements in technology and feminist action to secure human rights for women and to provide help for children. And we are still here, where some remain isolated on farms, in some cases with fewer options than I had. Many still run alone because there is nowhere else to turn. Many of those kids too often run straight into the clutches of people poised to hurt them more. But there is a bigger truth here that we must fully recognize. For every child who runs, there are countless others who cannot. They are too young, too isolated, too scared, or too conditioned and unable to see a world beyond the abuse. Those children don't show up in our statistics. They suffer in silence because the systems meant to protect them simply can't reach them. And with that, trauma enters another generation of souls. These people grow up so deeply embedded in an environment where survival eventually requires denying, accommodating, then enabling, and ultimately defending the very systems or family that harmed them or continues to harm children. This has given me a new understanding of the women in our political landscape who lean conservative. In the same way, early feminism limited its gains to white middle-class women, I'm beginning to see how modern iterations have centered on the urban woman and left our rural counterparts behind, handicapped in recognizing the systems they may be supporting. And with that, we need to take a small break, but we will be right back. This story continues.
CFRO has the most reggae and Caribbean music of any station in the Vancouver area. Start your week off with some reggae oldies on Tuesdays from 10:30 a.m. to noon with Level the Vibes. Roots Reggae is on Fridays from midnight to 7 a.m. The Reggae Show from 6 to 8:30 p.m. every Saturday, followed by Caribbean Sounds from 8:30 to 11 p.m. On the first and second Saturday of every month, it's a Reggae Extended Mix from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then Super Mix on the third, fourth, and fifth Saturday on CFRO 100.5 FM, Vancouver Cooperative Radio.
I'm not the wound, I'm not the fall, not the silence, not the wall. I'm not the night they couldn't see. I'm the best me rising free. I'm not what happened to me. I'm what I choose to be. Each step I take, I shift, I rise. The past dissolves before my eyes. I'm not what happened to me. I'm what I choose to be. Each step I take, I shift, I rise. The past dissolves before my eyes. Not the moment, not the mark. I am more than what went dark. I hold the sun behind my skin. I plant the truth and grow within. I'm not what happened to me. I'm what I choose to be. Each breath I take, I shift, I rise. The story ends, the soul flies. I'm not what happened to me.
Listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and if you're just joining us, this is an unusual program here for ReThreading Madness, as I have been sharing my lived experience of being a child and having to go back to rural Alberta to deal with my father's estate and what that taught me. I am telling this story because silence has never protected a child. It did not protect me. It does not protect the children growing up on isolated farms today. What it does protect is the status quo, the myth of the great virtuous pioneer, the continuation of intergenerational trauma, the reputation of the family, not the reality of it, and the power structure within our communities that allows some to be hurt and others to be free from accountability. Systems don't change if we disappear. They change when we refuse to be erased. For me, the thing that sustained me as I pushed through whatever I had to go from being a part of the Delia, Alberta community to the person I am now, is knowing that lies never hold up. Exposed to daylight, they collapse. But truth endures, and that is what I hang on to. I know my truth. I can speak it easily because it's real. Truth also imprints onto the physical world in a way that never dissipates. I ran away and stayed away to keep myself and my daughters safe. I may not be there any longer, but the truth of what happened to me settled into the buildings on that farm, into the soil, into the rafters and the floorboards, into the surfaces that held me. It is in the farm's iconic red barn and the dust from grinding oats that landed in its attic. It's in the house my father built, in the childhood bedroom I shared with my big sister, in the rec room with the lock on the door where my father moved me to allow unnoticed access. It's in the kitchen where my mother insisted I be nicer to my brother-in-law who had harmed me. It's in the school I attended, whose hallways bustled with students up to just a couple years ago. It's in the fields where I hiked because there was nowhere else to go. It's in the trees, the fences, in the gravel that toughened my feet so I could run. Truth is carried by that endless prairie wind and settles into buildings and pastures and communities long after survivors like me are gone. And there have been many survivors like me. The harm happened there, but what happened to me does not define my life. When you out yourself, like I have here, it's sometimes all that people can see about you from that point forward. But I am not what others did to me. I am not the rumors a small town embraced to excuse itself for failing one of its citizens. I am not the devastation I felt after court. There are several things that brought me my freedom. One of them is refusing to be quiet. When we speak the truth, we interrupt silence. We interrupt intergenerational trauma passed down like heirlooms. And while that interrupts families, our families, it is a necessary act to protect the generations of children coming after us. We interrupt systems that believe there is no harm in maintaining the status quo, or the myth of the great pioneer, or that harm comes from pushing the advancements of social progress aside. Where I grew up, newfangled ideas from the city were frowned upon, and what I experienced recently is the consequence of not paying attention to them. By speaking up, we remind every child who is still planning their escape, and every adult still carrying what was done to them, and every survivor sitting in a rural courtroom or farm kitchen or school hallway, that silence is a choice, and what other people did to you does not dictate your destiny. I am the woman who built a life my family could never have imagined for me. As mentioned before, I was there in the early 80s at the beginning of a movement that finally named child sexual assault for what it was, where rape survivors gained rights and battered spouses found safety, when human trafficking in Canada was seen and survivors of clergy abuse were heard. And today, I am an award-winning mental health advocate and considered one of the leading voices on therapy abuse, advising organizations and offering workshops, lectures, and support groups to survivors and therapists around the world. I am the host of this program, ReThreading Madness. I have interviewed scholars, survivors, top psychiatric professionals, and advocates about dismantling the systems that wound us. This international award-winning syndicated show gives people living with mental health challenges a place to name their truth. I am a writer whose work has reached national publications, government ministries, and communities searching for language to understand harm. I have written books and essays on therapy, harm, and ethical boundaries that help others name and frame what happened to them. I am also a visual artist. My work is held in private collections around the world. I teach art. I curate exhibitions. And for more than 40 years, I have worked to advance disability rights and trauma-informed systems, the most lasting consequence of what happened to me as a child in that rural community are the physical disabilities I live with, disabilities now scientifically linked to that very childhood trauma. But even that does not define me. What does is that I took what was meant to silence and break me and turned it into a life built on voice. Every word, every page, every interview, every act of refusing to disappear, that is who I am. My voice, my agency, and my right to shape what comes next in my life. And that, after everything, is what it means to reclaim a life, to reclaim power. And today, that is why it was important for me to step out from behind the mic and speak to you all directly. This is not just a story about my family or my life. It is a story about what happens when entire regions of this country get left behind on issues of sexual violence, disability rights, and trauma-informed justice. What I experienced in rural southern Alberta in 2025 mirrored what I fled in 1975. And if a courtroom in Canada can still function that way today, then something far larger is broken. As a country, as individuals, we need to do better. Let's find a way to do better.
Oh, you hear this? A lot of people call this rock and roll. Swings. This is done with the, let's see, with the left hand, yeah. And the right hand fits in with something like this here. Here we go now.
Yeah, it's called rock and roll, and you can hear all about it on Rock Talk. Discover the hidden but enchanting side of the music. Friday mornings at 9 o'clock.
Oh, if that isn't enchanting, nothing is. Go ahead, kids. Dance. Go crazy.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm about to chat with Jamie Smallboy and Ali Giesbrecht about their art on display at Gachet's Oppenheimer show. Jamie is a Cree single mother of 5 from Maquaches, Alberta. She's a full-time student at Langara and the founder of the Red Ribbon Skirt Project for the families of our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. And Ali is a child of immigrants from Hong Kong who resides in Vancouver, Chinatown. She is an activist, person of color, mental health occupational therapist, and a resident of Vancouver's downtown east side. You can check our website to see her full bio. The piece of artwork these two collaborated on combines painted images that Ali has produced with poetry that Jamie has written. And before we begin talking about this piece and missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, Jamie has generously offered to share her poem.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for listening. The poem that I wrote it in 2019, getting ready for a rally at Crab Park, and I heard that there was an open mic there. So I had sat down and started thinking of the many women that I know of that we've seen, splashed all over social media by their loved ones that have been missing or that were found murdered. And I was thinking, what can I write? Like, what questions can I ask? What words can I say in this poem? This poem just came. It was done within an hour. Wow. And it's called If I Were a White Girl. If I were a white girl, they would have found me by now. They would have had hundreds of people searching for me, not just my family and friends. If I were a white girl, the police would have believed my mom. Something happened to me. I would reach her if I could, but I couldn't. It was a dead end. If I were a white girl, they would have started an investigation instead of saying I was out partying with friends or I didn't want to be found, because I wasn't, and I did, but there was no help around. If I were a white girl, I wouldn't be laying here now, smelling my own decay, wondering, will the snow find me before my family does, as my killer walked away. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have stabbed me repeatedly, splattering my Indian blood while knocking out my teeth. If I were a white girl, my brown flesh wouldn't have been torn as he was dragging me through the gravel into the trees. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have punched me in the face for fighting as he tried to choke out my last breath. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have bit me, spit on me, and beat me as he raped me before my death. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have been excited by my terror and my fear, or my rejection of his sexual advances and his offer of cheap beer. If I were a white girl, I would likely have been his passenger and certainly not his prey. If I were a white girl, he wouldn't have dared to think of killing me here this day. But wait, if I were a white girl, he would have felt obligated to get me safely to where I needed to go. And if I were a white girl, I wouldn't have been hitchhiking in the first place. I'd have opportunity, privilege, and a home. If I were a white girl, I wouldn't have had a target on my back placed for me at birth. I wouldn't be missing and murdered and laying dead here in the earth. I'm an endangered species, yet not important enough to top your great white lists. Your Indian Act could not stop my bloodline. Your sterilization crusade was cut short. Your society grooms those that kill me, and there is no justice for me in your court. You're killing me with your own hands, Canada. That is genocide. If I were a white girl in this country, I wouldn't have had to fight this hard to survive, only to die here today this way. And that, it just, thinking of all the girls that have gone missing, girls that I knew from when I was homeless out here on the street that helped me learn how to survive out there, that I still don't know where they are to this day. Amber Takararo, she was taken from Nisku in Alberta and found in Beaumont. And there was a recording, a phone call recording that was recorded by Corrections Canada. The last phone call that she had was with her brother, who was at the time an inmate, and it recorded, and you could hear the terror in her voice, and you could hear like the cat that caught the canary, the tone of voice and her abductor's voice when he was talking to her. And those kinds of things, they stick with you. Even though, I didn't know Amber personally, that trauma sticks with you. When you get to know somebody, that trauma stays.
Yeah. Are there other people that you have known that have gone missing?
Oh my gosh, yes. There were a few. My niece, Verlene Erminskin, she was found beat up in Wetaskiwin, Alberta. My close friend, Rona Erminskin, childhood friend, she was found murdered in Musqueam, Alberta. My friend, Tammy Mycat, found in Edmonton. Billy Johnson, my childhood friend, Marlis's daughter, she went missing Christmas Eve and was found in April, and she was also murdered. There's just so many, Bernadine. And you're right, it's like wallpaper. And one thing that really infuriates me is, the awareness has become a clothing line, right. Jeans that have missing and murdered patches, earrings that match hats, that match shoes. It's really getting ridiculous We're not a clothing line. Our trauma is not a clothing line. This is
No.
our life. This is our, the ones that have passed on, that were stolen and murdered. It's their lives. It's not something, it's not a clothing line.
No.
It's not something for you to profit from.
Are you saying that when you say clothing line, are you saying that people are putting the issue of murdered and missing women onto t-shirts and
everything?
Oh
I'm
my God.
sure, like if you go on social media, you'll see it. Even with our residential school children, like every child matters. Every child does matter. But when they started that movement, it was for the 215 Indigenous children
Yes.
that were discovered. And it took away that Indigenous voice and just made it, they just generalized it. Yes, every child matters, but those are Indigenous children. And that is just it's getting out of hand. There are non-Indigenous companies that are mass producing missing and murdered and residential school survivors, red shirts, orange shirts. And it's really infuriating because we're not a clothing line. Our trauma is not for you to make money off of.
No.
If you really supported it, there'd be so much more you could do than, make $20, $25 off of a shirt or a pair of jeans.
But it is in keeping with how people perceive that it's okay somehow to exploit a Native person or a Native idea. In the art world, we're constantly struggling over and over with, Indigenous art being taken and just used. I mean, people just don't seem to understand that it's not up for grabs. Allie, how did this piece come together for you?
It's a little bit of an interesting story. I was attending the Women's Memorial March in the downtown East Side, and I heard Jamie share this poem. I think it was Jamie's first time sharing this poem in public. And I was so deeply moved as someone just listening. And I felt in me, like the spirit inside me just felt I wanted to do something with that feeling, with being moved. And so I found a way to get in touch with Jamie. I sought out the organizers of the march, and they were able to get in touch with Jamie and then put the two of us in touch. And so one of the reasons I felt so deeply moved is also because I felt really strongly this need to respond to the suffering that you could very clearly hear in Jamie's voice, and not just Jamie as an individual, but the suffering that's happening in our own communities. And so I did this work from the position of someone who belongs to communities who have historically and even presently are marginalizing Indigenous voices. So that includes like immigrant communities where they've been sold this lie of the American dream, where you can come and start from scratch, but it's not true. It's a lie where it's that starting from scratch is built off of the suffering of Indigenous peoples.
Right.
And so this need to want to show up and say, as a person of color, as an immigrant or a child of immigrants, to say like, hey, I see you, I know this is happening, and I want to respond, and I want to show up and say sorry, and in a very active way. And the same thing also as a Christian. I think there's been so much hurt done by the church historically and even now. And again, so much of my desire and my passion for justice really comes from my faith tradition. And it's really, it's really heartbreaking to me to see and know the things done and perpetrated in the name of Christianity. It's really quite sickening.
It must be heartbreaking for you.
Yeah.
So how did you pick the images that you were going to use? Was there a theme?
These are all hand drawn, is based on Jamie's poems. So just the images that they provoked and inspired in me. And this is really interesting because it's not, I think before this piece, I've never actually done any artwork as with the title as an artist. And so, yeah, it was kind of, again, this longing feeling that of responding to that cry from Jamie's poem. Yeah, so Jamie and I often just think of it as like kind of a divine thing.
A divine collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I seen her artwork, it was like she put visibility to the words. Like she just nailed that poem with her artwork. It really touched me to see when she said that, you know, that was her way of saying I see you. That told me she does, and that was so heartfelt.
Well, that's wonderful. It is a very, very powerful piece. So thank you, Jamie and Ali, for coming in and chatting with me about this, and congratulations on your piece.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our show. What you heard today reflects my lived experience, how harm travels across generations, how silence protects systems, and how speaking out can create change. There have been many who have shared their stories of childhood trauma with us here on ReThreading Madness, and I stand in good company because of them. This includes Judy, Kevin, Lenny, Patty, Andrea, Lanny, Emma, Amy, and Julie, Brenda, Rodney, Keith, Caroline, and Rebecca, Lori, Cassandra, Suzanne, Karen, Wadley, Forrest, Teresa, Angela, and Susie, to name a few. People who have shown us what it means to speak up. If any part of this story has resonated with you or challenged you, I invite you to keep the conversation going in your communities. We change systems together, not alone. That said, if that's not available to you where you live, don't hesitate to reach out to me here on ReThreading Madness. My thanks again to Jamie Smallboy and Ali Gisbrick, whose work and poem were a part of the Gallery Gachet Oppenheimer Park show a couple of years ago. One of my most favorite people, and someone I refer to as a friend, Sherry Ulrich, has again musically moved us in and out of this program. Today, it feels so very appropriate. Other music was by Good Vibes Tribe. Thank you for listening and joining us today. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and stay safe out there. You've just listened to ReThreading Madness, where we dare to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.